Hello, I'm Casey Aiken, and this is 21 This Week. Coming up next, did the County Council produce a balanced budget without increasing taxes or igniting a taxpayer revolt? And why did Maryland lose its AAA bond rating and Virginia did not? Our panel of insiders will give you the story behind the story. We're joined by the Secretary of the Maryland Republican Central Committee, Mark Uncapher, and attorney and former House of Delegate member, Maricé Morales. Stay tuned for these stories and more on the next 21 This Week. After a tumultuous session of the Maryland General Assembly that including having to deal with a $3.5 billion deficit, which was resolved by shoveling off millions of dollars of state obligations from the state to the counties and increasing taxes, which one of the pundits described as a strategic fund reallocation. It was not a surprise that the Montgomery County Executive and County Council would have some hard choices to make when finalizing the county budget. For County Executive Mark Elrich, the man who thinks all problems can be solved by an increase in taxes, the only choice was which taxes to raise, real property taxes or county income taxes. For the county council members and all of the wannabe county executives on the council, the idea of increasing taxes immediately prior to an election year was almost as unpopular as reducing union contracts. Both were a non-starter. Maricé, according to Bethesda magazine, the council preliminarily, they had a straw vote, approved a $7.6 billion operating budget for the next fiscal year without increasing taxes. This decision was achieved through a combination of strategic financial measures and collaborative efforts. How did they accomplish this? And why actually is the police union challenging the proposal to apply future retiree health benefits to pay for the excessive MCPS, if that's a tongue twister, MCPS costs?
Well, first, kudos to Kate Stewart. I think she shined through. I think the fact that she was able to get these groups all in a room and figure this budget out without increasing taxes, kudos to her. I think she shines in this because she has, she's been in an executive position as a former mayor of Tacoma Park. But, for folks that may not be as I would say, that aren't as familiar with this specific responsibility that the county government does have is you have to fund into the future, right, up to a certain percent. I'm going to make up a percentile, but it's fairly high. By 2030, the county has to fund up to 75% of these retiree benefits. And so we're basically borrowing for ourselves from ourselves. And I think it was a creative and a smart way to address an issue that, right now all of the county residents are feeling, and that is, if we were to increase taxes, obviously it would not be popular, but also, just the economy and everything that's going on is just a non-starter, as you said. And so I think kudos to the county council, kudos to Kate Stewart. I think that's brilliant. But I understand that the FOP is also going to voice, its concern because they just want to make sure that their benefits are there when their retirees and mostly millennials, are going to come out retiring, making sure that they have those full pensions to cover what their needs are going to be in the future as retirees.
Well, I mean, there were some interesting comments by the county council and afterwards, and particularly from Gabe Alvarez, who, said he's really worried about what's going to happen in the future, that you can only kick this can down the road so far before you're going to have to make some hard, tough choices. So is the council just avoiding making tough choices now, or are they really going to address things in the future, Mara? So is it just election year politics as usual?
I don't think it's as usual. I think the issue coming out of Washington and the federal funding that we're getting is definitely a huge issue that all county governments are dealing with. But I agree. I don't think that this is a sustainable fix. I think that this is just temporarily, and we're going to have to come up with other ways to increase tax revenue. And I don't think that by increasing people's taxes is the way to go. I think by attracting, and listen, I'm a Democrat, but I'm a business owner. I'm very like techie, I would say, and I do want to attract like the Amazons of the world, which we lost to Northern Virginia. So I agree. I think we're going to have to come up with other sustainable solutions. And I don't think that borrowing from ourselves is the way to go forever.
So, Mark, let's start, Mark. The county executive had, initially proposed a 3.25% property tax increase, later revised that to a 1% income tax, which had been approved by the General Assembly. The council immediately unanimously rejected those, but there's a lot of, other comments and voices that objected to the tax increases. The Committee to Control Montgomery County Spending described the council's budget as another exercise kicking the can down the road and does not address the root cause of the county spending beyond its means. Is there a growing taxpayer revolt that we're going to see in real time?
Certainly not if there's not a tax increase, and I certainly agree with Maricé. I was pleasantly surprised to see the council take the action that it took and avoid that. I certainly agree that it's a short-term budgetary sleight of hand to delay the payments. Hopefully, the operative verb is delay the funding for the retirement benefits, health benefits. So that's good news. What's always amazing to me is these are changes, these are steps that Mark Elrick could have taken, but somehow I think he's got his fat finger on the press release to always go for the tax increase and negotiate from there. I would make one observation that MCPS goes up dramatically, significant increases, and this is in the context of basically having flat enrollments, despite projections that the enrollment would increase. So I think that we really, in future years, need to do a better job of looking at what are the appropriate funding levels for the school system.
Well, I want to, follow up with you, Mark, because my sense is that because of the actions of the General Assembly during the last session, and the possibility of a special session, which also may increase taxes, there is going to be I guess maybe a taxpayer revolt is the wrong term, but there are going to be a lot of people questioning the direction that the General Assembly and by effect,
absolutely. Let me make a clear differentiation between the reaction of taxpayers to what the General Assembly and the governor have done, as opposed to Montgomery County, and I think I clearly want to make that distinction. We can certainly talk in more detail about what the state did.
Well, Maricé, this is one of the difficulties in balancing a budget, as you know from your days as a legislator, is income projection. And the county, the General Assembly has increased, taxes dramatically on the wealthy, and by increasing new tiered taxes, as well as a capital gains tax. Montgomery County has a high population of wealthy individuals, and if those people decide to leave, that's going to have a direct impact on Montgomery County. So what is your assessment of how, is the council taking all of these factors into account? I mean, right now, Montgomery County is the third highest state and local income tax rate in the country. It's not sustainable.
I agree with you on this one, Casey. I mean, and like I said, I think we're living unprecedented times. I think that Governor Moore and the General Assembly and their approval ratings actually also reflect that. I mean, the General Assembly has overwhelmingly had the support of Marylanders in terms of their performance, and I think taxpayers and residents at large understand that we're not living normal times, and that we're having to address the issue with just the cut in federal funding, cuts in our jobs. We have a lot of dependency on federal jobs, and that's just a matter of fact. And so I think that combined, I think the average voter and even folks that may not even, just keep up with politics, they understand that in the greater scheme of things, we're dealing with unprecedented times.
So, Mark, just before, we're going to go to a break in a minute or two, but I want to just touch on the fact that, a heavyweight trade association, the Greater Capital Area Association of Realtors, came out very strong against the Ehrlich tax proposals. But they weren't the only ones that were voicing opposition to any tax increases.
I think there was real pushback for it. There's absolutely no question. And your We'll talk about it when we talk about the state issues, but there's really an unsustainable fiscal approach of relying on fewer and fewer people, high income people with capital gains who depend on the stock market doing really well and for the generating revenues. And we've seen in states like California and New York, when you go down that road, you're really putting yourself on a fiscal roller coaster. And so that's very dangerous for the long term for the state of Maryland.
I think a lot of the politics of 2026 are wrapped in here. One of the council members that expressed an interest in increasing taxes was Will Jawando. So real quickly, we have a couple minutes left. Does it surprise you that Jawando came out so early with a campaign committee to run for county executive? I'll start with you, Maricé, and let you wrap up, Mark.
I'm not surprised. We know that Will has expressed and he actually filed for a public campaign finance committee, which means that he's going to have to meet a certain threshold of contributions from county residents. And so then, because Evan Glass had, he kicked off back in April, I'm not surprised. And because you have to give yourself time to get all these different residents, and then you can actually qualify for the county match. And so it makes sense that he would come out this early.
Well, I was going to say, you're absolutely right about the campaign finance issues. If you're David Trone and you can write yourself a check, or you're David Blair and you can write yourself a check, or Glenn Youngkin and you can write yourself a check, you can wait to when people are really paying attention. But one of the perverse aspects of the public financing system is it really creates because you can only get contributions of a certain size and you have to reach certain numbers. It creates an incentive to lengthen the amount of time that a campaign takes place. So we shouldn't be surprised when we see that happen.
Well, from my personal experience, I ran with public financing, and I wouldn't say that it's perverse. If anything, I think it democratizes the opportunities to run. I don't come from wealth. I had to go door to door and raise that money from county residents. And so I admire candidates that go down that road. Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, yeah, it puts a lot more work on the backs of the candidates. And I think at the end of the day, it's not just, can I write myself a check? And and Andrew Friedson is a close friend of mine. I'm not getting involved or anything, but Andrew does have that advantage where he does have that money, and he's going to have more time to focus on his current job, and also that will feed into whatever goes on comes with his platform. I think that it does give you the advantage of if you already have those those campaign funds, it does give you the advantage to be out with your constituents and actually doing the job versus staying at home and doing like call time, because I hated call time with a passion. I hated it.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. We're running out of time, and these are not the only two members of the county council that are thinking about running. And so we'll wait and see what happens during the summer. But when we come back from this short break, the blame game begins as Maryland loses its AAA bond rating, the only state in the nation to have been lowered in this fashion this time. Stay tuned. And welcome back. Since 1973, Moody's, the global credit rating agency that provides creditworthiness and financial stability evaluations of states and local governments, has awarded its highest rating, the AAA bond rating, to the state of Maryland. That is until May 14th, 2025, when Moody's downgraded the state's credit rating to AA. Maricé, Moody's cited several factors contributing to Maryland's downgrade: economic and financial underperformance compared to other AAA rated states. The state's economy is highly susceptible to shifts in federal policies and employment, and elevated fixed costs. Maryland faces high fixed costs, including obligations related to pensions, healthcare, and education, which strains its financial flexibility. While Maryland has taken steps to address these things, these measures have been insufficient so far. What's going to happen?
What's going to happen, huh? I mean, first, I can't refute the fact that we got this downgrade. But I do want to compare apples to apples and kind of put it into perspective. And reading Moody's assessment, it's clear we have very I would say, demanding projects that we are still looking to fund. We have Purple Line, the Red Line. Obviously, Moody has an issue with our blueprint, and I get that. I think this is a symptom that I've been talking about within my party as a Democrat is, we have a hard time saying no. We want to fully fund everything, and I'm the eldest of four daughters. My parents couldn't send all of us to the French, like fancy school. They had to send one of us and not the other. So it's just like we can't always take care of everything, and unfortunately, when you're a politician and you have all these promises, it's hard when you're trying to meet all of those responsibilities. That said, the downgrade from the AAA to the AA, in the grand scheme of things, you're looking at a 0.10 to 0.25 percentile in increase in the interest. I mean, we're still going to pay off our debts. We're still, it's still a high rating. But yeah, in comparison to Virginia, we need to do better. And that's what I was trying to get at, where Virginia has attracted, national, like just private investment from the tech industry. You got Amazon, you got counties even, having these data centers like Loudoun County, for example. They get 75% of their city revenue comes from outside sources, not having to tax their residents. So we do have to look beyond tax increases, and that's really, I think it is a time to kind of just self-reflect, and see, how we're doing vis-a-vis our, the counties in Northern Virginia. And I think that if Montgomery County wants to continue to be competitive and bring young professionals, tech, I would say innovative sectors, then we need to be able to compete with Northern Virginia, like Fairfax, Arlington places, for
Well,
example.
that is such a great analogy and a great way to segue to the question for Mark, which was, you know, uh, our neighboring state of Virginia did maintain its AAA bond rating, despite the fact of having some of the same issues given vis-a-vis federal employment. But some of the factors in its favor were economic resilience, as Maricé said, being able to be less dependent on federal employment, strong financial management. Even though the General Assembly is dominated by a different party than the governor, they still seem to be able to work together to control spending and a capacity to absorb revenue declines. So, Mark, you know, are we going to learn from what Virginia is doing, or are we just going to keep going down the same path that Maryland seems to like to go down each and every year?
Well, let me pick up on Maricé's point about data centers, because I think that they're illustrative of the issue. Loudoun County takes in about an extra $1.5 billion from both property tax and personal property tax, or real estate property tax and personal property tax. That's almost equivalent, roughly the same as the General Assembly's tax increase. Now, Loudoun County is only one jurisdiction in Virginia that attracts data centers. It's about half the size of Montgomery County in terms of population, and yet it's absolutely driven this boom in revenues. We're not talking about any special taxes, just the regular taxes that would take place. Contrast that with what the General Assembly did with their 3% tax on IT services, roughly about $500 million, which even Democratic legislators, Delegate Crosby, we talked about driving businesses in that sector out of the state into Virginia. So if we had the potential of attracting data centers and more IT sensitive businesses, we probably did everything we possibly could to make that not happen. And that's really a shame. So we're kind of at a fork in the road. And if we follow down this fork in the road, the challenge is that Maryland becomes that much more dependent on the federal government because it can't attract the private investment that neighboring states get. And that's a real problem.
So, Maricé, well, according to the Washington Post, and this is, a natural reaction, the political debate within state Democratic leaders, including Governor Moore, was to attribute the downgrade to federal policy decisions. But that doesn't really tell the whole story, does it?
Well, I mean, I would say it's a combination of things. Like, as I mentioned, there is an economic downturn nationally. On top of that, Maryland is heavily dependent on federal employment. And, just speaking, I mean, you can't speak on these issues as if policy changes or impacts to I guess consumer behavior or population preferences, as if it all happens in a vacuum. You have to look at also population trends. And I'm glad that Mark went into the model of Loudoun County. If you look at the population of Loudoun County, they are diverse, young, very, very tech savvy. And I'm talking about the area of like Herndon and Reston, like that. They're attracting, and there's a reason. There's leadership that has that mindset. And so that said, when I was in the legislature, I kid you not, I was the youngest, but by 20 to 25 years on average. And so the issue with having a single party state, and like I said, I agree with a lot of you with a lot of the policy issues here, because when a party, it's like anything, it's like when a party is sitting pretty and there's no real competition, then the same old folks keep getting reelected and there's no novelty, there's no there's no like innovation. And so we see that in contrast with Northern Virginia. Now, don't there's a lot of public finance issues over there, but it's not just the issue that we're looking at right now. It's population changes, it's different ideas, innovation, etc. And again, I was born in Virginia, but I chose to come to Montgomery County because I'm progressive and Montgomery County. So I also chose to pay more taxes. And I know that Republicans don't understand this, but for me, it's a value. It's like
Well,
I want to have.
we do understand that because
Yes.
some of us choose to still live in Maryland. Mark, we only have about a minute left in this segment. So what I really want is kind of a forecast. They're talking about a special session of the General Assembly. Generally, bad things happen when there's a special session. What are your thoughts about something happening in the fall?
Well, and one of the challenges that we had in the last session was there was kind of almost a whack-a-mole of different tax proposals getting suggested, getting raised in the press, and then they'd get knocked down, and then we'd move on to something else. So I think there's no question that there have been under serious consideration a variety of tax proposals. We mentioned the IT services. That kind of came out of left field at the last minute. We'll see what happens with that. So there's a lot to be afraid of going into this year. The challenge is the great reluctance to make cuts, to go back to the blueprint and say we can't afford it yet. And that's unfortunate.
I want to give Maricé the last word. Maricé, when you were in the General Assembly, did you go through a special session?
I did not.
You
I did
never? So you never had the...
No, we got. I was serving with Governor Hogan. So at the time, we were able to close all our budget issues, but I never served. I heard about the stories, but I never served a special session.
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up there. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens. And the mood of the public is going to be key to this. I mean, sooner or later, the Next Generation Energy Act is going to be signed into law by Governor Moore. And when that opens up the door for additional expenses to consumers in a dramatic way. And I think there's going to be pushback from the citizens. Stay tuned for parting shots when we come back from this short break. And welcome back. Now with parting shots, Maricé Morales.
I would just say, don't go into the weeds of this AAA. You can read some, but please don't let it make you more apathetic. We are now more than ever. We need to vote. State, local elections, get involved. We're not, just because we lost the AAA rating doesn't mean we're out here looking like Detroit or Illinois. We're not a junk bond status state, okay? But that's what I would say to my fellow Democrats.
Thank you, Maricé. Mark Uncapher, your parting shot.
Well, this weekend is the Preakness, and it will be the sort of last running of the Preakness up at Pimlico before it's torn down. Forgive me, I hope everybody enjoys the party up there because it really is a Maryland party. But I will say also that I think it's an example where the state looks backwards, looks to the past, as opposed to looking to the future. And I think that sometimes is a shame. So I'm sorry we're spending all that money, but at least enjoy it while it's all going on.
Mark, years ago I suggested that we do away with Pimlico and do NASCAR instead. So, yeah, and
that would look to the future, right? NASCAR,
buggy whips, right? Buggy whips. All right. I want to thank you both for appearing today. It was a great conversation. I want to thank the audience for tuning in each and every week to Montgomery County's hardest hitting political talk show. For 21 This Week, I'm Casey Aiken.